Greetings, this is Management 431, Strategic Staffing is the textbook, and we are now getting into, in the second module, Chapter 4, which is Strategic Job Analysis and Competency Modeling. We've already covered some of the background information, sort of how do we think about staffing in a strategic context, particularly with respect to the strategic direction of the organization. We've talked about the legal context. We also took a little leap ahead and we started talking about measurement. And I thought it was important to talk about measurement before job analysis because when we do job analysis, we have to do a good job of measuring the attributes of the surveying and measuring the attributes of the job so that we can have a good way to develop our job description and job specification for the organization. So we'll spend some time now talking about the background of what job analysis is, what the output is, and we'll start getting into it as we get through each section of this particular lecture. In terms of the learning objectives for this particular lecture module in this chapter in the textbook, we'll be talking about why job analysis is strategic, how we can connect the job analysis process with the strategic objectives of the organization, how important that is. We'll look at the different types of job analyses and what they're used for. We'll look at the difference between a job description and a person specification and see what it is that they both give us specifically and how we utilize that in the job search, the personnel search process. We want to describe the advantages and disadvantages of different types of methods for doing job analysis. They all have their pros and cons. They all offer us something important that we might need, but we need to know what those trade-offs are. We need to know how to plan to do a job analysis and how to actually conduct it. So what we're going to go through from soup to nuts is really understanding job analysis and then specifically talk a little bit about competency-based modeling and how important that is to the organization. As you may remember from Management 430, job analysis is a really important part of the process. It is the foundation really upon which every HR functional activity is based. And it's what it is as specifically defined, of course, as you can read the slide there, it's a systematic process of identifying and describing the aspects of the job and the characteristics of the worker that's needed in order for them to perform the job well. So we need to know the most important factors of the job, and then we need to know what characteristics individuals need to be able to perform that job. So job analyses are used to help us decide what the job entry requirements are, the minimum expectations. Do we want someone to have a skill set or not? Are we willing to train them on the job? But what competencies then do they need to have in order to be able to come in to do that? So we have to think about that. It helps us come up with our strategic recruiting plan. So once we know the KSAs that we need in employees who can do the job successfully, then we need to figure out where we're going to find those skilled workers and which sources will be more likely to get us the skills that we're looking for. It'll help us to select the right person that we want to make a job offer to bring them into the organization because we determine the KSAs of the selection tools we use based off of the job analysis output, the job specifications that we create. So once we know what the KSAs are, we determine which selection tools we'll select for those, and then we administer those selection tools in order to help us to make a good employment decision. In terms of performance management aspects, number one, it helps us with training because if we know the skill set someone needs to be able to do a job, if they don't have that skill set, we have to implement a training plan for them to be able to learn the skills that they need to be successful. Second to last is the compensation system. Remember job evaluation, how we evaluate jobs and assign dollar values to those jobs based on compensable factors. Those compensable factors are based off of the KSAs and the job requirements that are needed to be able to do a specific job. So we evaluate the job and create a wage or a salary attached to that job based on what we learn from job analysis and then applying that to job evaluation. Lastly, performance valuation measures, particularly with around pay for performance, if we set a certain standard for performance, that needs to be embedded in the job description and the requirements needed to be able to perform the job adequately. It creates the standards against which we evaluate the applicant, and if we have a pay for performance system, the standards against which they will be rewarded for achieving their pay for performance goals. So again, we need to make sure we understand the KSAs before we can evaluate them against those KSAs and then ultimately reward them for achieving the job performance that we want based on the KSAs determined during job analysis. So as much as this is a very important topic, it can be sort of challenging to think about how would we do this and why. And it is a very detailed process, and as I'm sure you'll understand, it can be a bit of a political process because people are always trying to protect their territory. So people might overinflate the value of their job, and others might underinflate the value of somebody else's job. So we have to recognize that embedded in this job analysis process can be a political process behind it all. When we are doing job analysis, part of the process is trying to group jobs into what we call job families. So recruiting positions, secretarial positions, engineering positions, they're all grouped based on a particular job family. So for example, personnel recruiters might be everything from an employment coordinator at the lowest level to the lead recruiter or the head of recruiter at the highest level, and it might be sort of anywhere in between. So all of these positions, if they happen to be in a company, will all be grouped together in the job family of personnel recruiters because they all represent different types of recruiting jobs. Same thing with secretaries. You've got secretary, clerk typist, department secretary, administrative support assistant, whatever the titles are, they're grouped together and they all fall under the category of secretaries. And as you can see, the same thing with chemical engineers. You can have anyone from a project engineer down to a basic scientist, all under the category of chemical engineers. So we group all the individual jobs in the company into this job family so that we know that they'll have similar skill sets, but perhaps with gradations of difficulty and more responsibility as the job description is defined. So higher level jobs require more skills, longer experience, et cetera, et cetera. And things how they work that way. So that's the first step we need to think about is how do we group these jobs into job families, because it does help it make it a bit easier for us to do job analysis if we can do them on groups of jobs and job families, because we know the skill sets will be very similar. In terms of job analysis for staffing, a job analysis should be producing a valid selection system that helps us to identify the characteristics of workers that we want. And the goal of that, and if we do a good job analysis, it should create a selection system that enables us to distinguish superior from average and an average to unacceptable workers. So we should be able to see a range of workers, and it should be able to differentiate between what is considered unacceptable, what is considered okay, and what is considered superior. It should be identifying characteristics that are not easily learned on the job. So something that we expect them to have in advance. And also in the job analysis process and producing a valid selection system should create at least a moderate, exist to at least a moderate extent in the applicant pool. And what that basically means is we need to make sure that if we're going to say someone needs a particular skill set, a certain set of knowledge, skills, and abilities, that this actually exists in the applicant pool. I mean, it'd be great to say people need a particular skill set, but if they're not available in your local area, or if they're not available at all anywhere, that's not really helpful to us. Then we've got to rethink about how do we train the people that we have on the skill set in a different way. So we then maybe need to create our own skill set. But the goal of this is that we want to make sure we're identifying characteristics that we know that do have some variance in them so that we can differentiate between really bad and really good people, that they're not easily learned on the job, so people have to have these skill sets and that they exist in the applicant pool, that we can actually find them if we look. Future-oriented job analysis is the techniques that we use to analyze new jobs that really haven't existed before, or helps us to identify and create job descriptions about what we might think something would need to have in the future. So again, our goal would be to figure out what are future jobs that we would need, and we would try to anticipate all of the things that would be needed to be able to do that job. Okay, your textbook author calls this job worker match, and I prefer the term person job match, and basically because we're matching the person and their skill set and what they bring to the table to the job and what the job requires, and the match that way. I mean, job worker is fine, but I like job person better, person job match, and that's a more common term that you'll hear people say, person job or person organization match. And so what we're talking about here is the person job match, or the job worker match. And what we're trying to match is the current job tasks and responsibilities, to matching that to the employee's characteristics, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they bring to the table. So we want to match what the job requires and what I need jobs to have in order to succeed in my organization, and match that with an employee's knowledge, skills, and abilities. And there should be a match there. I'm matching the person, the employee, to the job. Then what I need to do is make sure that my reward system matches that of the needs of the employee. It's not enough to just have a job and a certain set of skills needed to do the job. We also need to make sure the job has both extrinsic and intrinsic rewards embedded in them, so that the employee can assess, or the future employee can assess the what that job reward is, and whether or not that's going to meet their needs and motivate them. Jobs can have all sorts of KSAs that are required, no problem. They can also have all sorts of rewards attached to them, but if those rewards don't matter to me, if I don't care, then you're not going to get good performance out of me. I'm less likely to be recruited and selected for that job, and I certainly won't accept the job if offered to me, because I won't like the reward system. So our goal is to make sure I identify what I need people to do on the job, and then assess the employees or the future employees to match that, making sure they have the KSAs, and then I need to create a reward system that matches the needs and the values and the motivations of the potential employees that are coming to my organization. In order for job analysis to meet minimum legal standards, there's a number of things that we need to consider. And these are all related to the employment law, things that we've already talked about. But just to make sure that they're clear, number one, they have to be valid and identify the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to do the job, and anything else, so that we can differentiate superior workers from unacceptable or barely acceptable workers. So we need to have a job analysis have as its output the results of the KSAs needed, what is considered not acceptable and what is considered acceptable, because when we are going to evaluate candidates for a job, we need to have a standard against which we evaluate them, and those standards need to be clear, because that's what we're going to be held to in the court of law. Number two, we want to make sure we have our job analysis in writing and be relevant to the particular job. We cannot have a job analysis that's just sort of random, or we downloaded it from the internet, but we need to have an analysis of the actual job that we're doing in our company and have the paperwork to support that. Lastly, when we're doing our job analysis, it has to come from multiple sources. It can't just be one person making a decision for everybody what that job characteristic is supposed to look like, and what is supposed to be in that job description. So that's why when we do job analysis, we use multiple sources. We use the job analyst, we use the manager, we use top management team, we use the employees, we use a whole host of different people with voice and input, and then we converge and create the job description based on that. There are a variety of practical reasons why we do job analysis, and Table 4.2 in your textbook has a really good listing of that, and it's reproduced here. So let me just go through them with you so you understand them. Number one, linking the staffing process to the firm's business strategy and to what the firm needs in terms of the positions in the future. So why do we want to do the job analysis? Again, to reiterate, because if we're trying to plan for jobs in the future based on what the strategic plan is talking about and what our business strategy wants to accomplish, we need to design job descriptions that reflect where the company is going and jobs that are going to help meet the demands in the future. Number two, it helps HR personnel write an accurate description of the job's requirements and duties for the purpose of advertising and recruiting. And again, everything that we do in HR is based on the job analysis. And so in order for us to be able to write the job ad and be able to state what are the minimum requirements for a job so that someone can apply, we need to be abundantly clear what those requirements are. And so we make sure that we do a really good, solid job analysis. We're absolutely legally and fundamentally clear on what those minimum requirements are so that when we advertise, we can demonstrate, in case there's any question legally, we demonstrate that we've done the analysis, we understand what we need, and if someone doesn't meet those minimum requirements, we can defend ourselves if we're accused of discrimination. Number three, enables HR personnel to write an accurate description of the type of person the organization wants to recruit. So again, we want to be able to advertise for certain jobs to recruit, but then we want to be able to have a description of what that ideal person looks like. What knowledge, skills, and abilities do we expect them to have? And so if we don't have a good idea what that is, it's going to be very difficult for us to recruit the right person or be within legal guidelines. The next, number four, it aids in the identification of the best selection methods that should be used to fill a position. And again, as we talked about measurement a little bit in the last lecture, we determine the KSAs for the job and what we expect people to have to be able to accomplish those jobs. And then we choose the selection tools that best match those KSAs, that are the most reliable and the most valid, and will get at exactly what it is that we're looking for. So it helps us to identify what are the KSAs needed, and then what are the right tools to measure those KSAs in the selection process. 5, it clarifies how to present the job's rewards to candidates in the most appealing way to match their needs and interests. As we said, with the person job match or the worker job match, we want to make sure that the rewards that are inherent in the job, whether they're extrinsic rewards like pay and benefits or intrinsic rewards like autonomy and mastery and purpose, we want to make sure that those intrinsic and extrinsic rewards are going to meet the needs of the employee. So job analysis helps us to do that. Number 6, it helps us to identify what to change in the current staffing system for a job. So if we are recognizing that we need a particular skill set that we haven't been testing for before, or it's a new skill set that no one's tested for before, we need to be able to adapt our staffing system to assess those needs and assess those KSAs. So we have to make sure that we are changing our staffing system based on what the job analysis process tells us. It provides a foundation to determine the best way to combine a job candidate's scores on multiple assessment methods to compute a total score for comparison with the scores of other candidates. So again, if we know from our job analysis that the most important skill somebody has to have is conscientiousness, and we're assessing conscientiousness on the job, right, then we know that we have to weight that in our multiple regression process or how we weight it in assessing and ranking candidates, that the heaviest weight needs to go on conscientiousness, and then the second heaviest weight might be on interpersonal skills, right? I mean, again, it depends on the whole range of things that we might be assessing, but that helps us. If we know the most important thing is a certain skill set, that's what gets the most weight when we're ready to make our hiring decision. So the things that we learn in our job analysis then informs the hiring process, specifically how we weight the variables. They're not always going to be equally weighted. You want to weight the things that people do the most. You weight those the most so that we get the most emphasis on that skill set so that people have that skill set. Lastly, it assists potential recruits when they are making up their minds about whether to apply based on their perceived fit with an interest in the requirements and responsibilities of the position. So we create job descriptions that we give to candidates and we let them know what's expected of them because it's a two-way street. It's not just us assessing the candidates. The candidates are determining for their own needs whether or not our company and our job is going to meet their needs. So we need to provide them as realistic a view of as possible of what that requirement is. So we have a job description that emphasizes what percentage of time they might spend on particular aspects of the job so that when they're ready to make that assessment, and they say, well, the job requires a lot of nights and weekends, and that's exactly when I want to work. I don't like mornings. Perfect job for me. And then somebody else like myself goes, oh, maybe not. Maybe I don't like working nights and weekends. Maybe I only like working days. So I would rather, work a different kind of job. So in the end, I might decide based on the job description that as much as that job sounds good, there are aspects of the job that I don't like and I know I won't find acceptable. So therefore, I'm not going to do that job. So there's a whole host of practical reasons to do a really good job in the job analysis. And that goes from everywhere of helping us to design for future jobs that meet our strategic needs all the way to helping us attract and retain the applicant in the process and keep them involved in the process. So letting them know upfront what the job requirement is really important. So as I've already said, the job description is one of the outputs from job analysis. It's not the only output. The job analysis gives us the job description, which is the written description of all the duties and responsibilities required to be able to do this job. So it typically includes the size and type of the organization, what industry they're working in, what department the person is in, what's the job title of the position, what is the salary range from the minimum one could expect to the maximum one would expect, what position, grade, or level. So is it a level 1 employee, a level 2 employee? Like you can have an HR assistant 1, HR assistant 2, and you could work your way up through the system. You want to know who the employee reports to and for whom that employee is responsible. Who are their subordinates? Do they have subordinates? They might not, but if there is if there's a superior subordinate relationship, we need to know how many employees I'm going to be responsible for. We want to make sure we have a brief summary of the main duties and responsibilities of the job, a brief summary of the occasional duties and responsibilities of the job. Clearly, we want to match someone for the main duties, but we also want people, and we give an edge to people who also can do the occasional duties. So that's the person that we would want to give a special edge to if we wanted to hire them. Any special equipment that's used on the job, if there's a particular equipment, machines, software that's required, we need to know that. If there's any special working conditions, if it involves travel, if it involves foreign travel, if it involves shift work or weekend work or night work, you name it. We want to know the purpose and frequency of the individuals with whom they have to work. For example, if I'm working in HR, I might need to be able to meet with department heads on a regular basis. I need to also be able to interact with accounting to deal with budgetary issues, bookkeepers to deal with the salary issues and things like that. Top management team, I would need to be working with them for strategic direction. So I need to talk about what kinds of interactions one could expect. And so you might see in an HR professional job description basically saying we'll meet monthly with department heads, quarterly with the top management team for strategic planning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that kind of thing. Lastly, you always want to have a statement that says other duties as assigned. And even though it seems like it's self-evident, that people would just do those jobs, you have to be really clear. There are many people that will only do the things that are in their job description. And so if you assign somebody something that seems to fit within their job, because jobs will change over time, and you might have someone work on a special project, which is a brand new skill set that they've never had to deal with before. So you want to make sure that someone recognizes that there needs to be some flexibility in their job and the things that they'll do on the job. So saying other duties as assigned is a catch-all phrase that protects you so that you can turn back to the employee and say, look, I get that these are the things that are initially in your job description, but we also said as jobs change, as special projects come up that we didn't anticipate, we're going to be asking you to do more things. And if these become regular activities, we'll go back, we'll change your job description, and it will reflect these new skills and abilities and knowledges that you need to have and you need to utilize on the job. Because the last thing you want is somebody on the job who's going to say, sorry, not my job description, I'm not going to do it. Well, that's what other duties as assigned means. It means you will do other things, maybe on a temporary basis, and maybe it will change your job description to something that you have to do on a permanent basis, but it needs to be in there so that you don't get pushback from people who are only going to do the bare minimum of what they're expected to do. So as for the person specification, as it's noted here, or I like to refer it as the job specification, what specifications is needed for the individual to be able to do the job. So we need to know the characteristics of what they need to do to perform the job well. We need to know the essential criteria that they have to have that is absolutely critical for them to perform. And then we need to know the desirable characteristics that are, it would be great if they could do this, but it's not essential. So essential is absolutely the essential characteristics of the job. And it, oftentimes the essential characteristics accommodate most of someone's job work, 75–80% of their work. On occasion, they might do something, in which case then if they have that nice skill set, that would be great. If they don't, we understand that it's not that important and maybe they can be trained on it. So it's those desirable characteristics that sometimes differentiate between two seemingly equal candidates. If one person is capable of doing the desirable thing, but another candidate can't or won't, then we would go with the candidate who can do the desirable thing because we give preference to that. As long as you're clear that this would be nice and we would give preference to candidates who have that skill set, that's a good thing. So in the end, after we do job analysis, this is what that flow diagram looks like. Job analysis is done. We'll talk in the next little lecturette about what job analysis actually looks like and what do we have to do. But the two outputs that we're concerned about are the job description, which outlines all the job responsibilities as we've talked about, and what I've called the job specification, but is called the person specification in this textbook, and that outlines all the essential criteria and the desirable criteria that we want an individual to have if they take on this job.